I died in Jean's world long before I ever collapsed. When the medics pulled me out of the rubble, my pulse was faint, my breathing shallow, and my name already forgotten by the woman who once said she couldn't live without me. The irony is, she lived just fine, flourished even. The woman who held my hand during sleepless nights turned cold the moment comfort became boring. So she faked a disease, said her heart was too fragile for love, then took that same fragile heart and boarded a flight with another man. It wasn't the betrayal that broke me. It was how easy it was for her to look me in the eye and lie. How she clutched her chest, played weak, whispered she needed to heal. When all she really needed was an excuse. She left me thinking I had done something wrong, that I was too much, too intense, too everything. I spent nights dissecting conversations, wondering where I failed. And while I spiraled, she was in Paris, sipping wine and laughing into the shoulder of a man who'd been waiting on the sidelines. I never confronted her. I didn't rage, didn't plead. I swallowed the pain, packed her things, and sent her a final message she never replied to. The silence wasn't closure, but it was loud enough to end everything. Karen was the one who found me half-conscious 3 days later. She said I looked like a man who had stopped eating and just hadn't realized it yet. She didn't ask questions. She cooked, stayed, watched me fall apart piece by piece. And then she said the one thing Jean never did. You don't deserve this. So I ran. Not from the pain, but toward danger, toward work that didn't care, who broke my heart. In collapsing buildings and bullet-ridden zones, I finally found something honest, something real. But fate, with its cruel sense of humor, brought Jean back into my life the day I nearly died saving a child. I don't remember falling. I just remember waking up in a hospital bed and seeing her at the foot of it, pale and shaking, tears sliding silently down her face. She hadn't cried when she left me, but she wept when she thought I'd never open my eyes again. My name is Victor Hale, 31 years old, former infantryman, now working high-risk private security in places people are paid not to talk about. Most of my body has more scars than I can remember collecting. But none of them hurt the way Jean did. We met 4 years ago at a charity fundraiser I had zero interest in attending. I wore a wrinkled shirt and stood next to a punch bowl like it was my assigned post. She walked, in wearing a red dress with sleeves that brushed her wrists and eyes that refused to look anywhere but ahead. I remember thinking she looked like someone who didn't know how beautiful she was, the kind of woman who made other people straighten their backs without realizing why. She asked if I was lost. I asked if she was judging me. We laughed at different times, but somehow, the rhythm still felt right. That night we talked about everything but the event itself. She hated crowds. I hated pretending. It made sense. Jean came from money. Not the flashy kind, but the kind you only notice when the bills never arrive. Her father was in publishing, her mother in real estate, and her life had always been a sequence of well-lit brunches and quiet arguments behind closed doors. She didn't flaunt it. She didn't need to. She had a way of carrying herself like the world owed her nothing, but gave it anyway. I was the opposite. Raised by a mother who once stole food from a grocery store just so we could eat. Grew up fighting over warmth in winter and silence in summer. The military didn't save me. It numbed me. By the time I met Jean, I'd forgotten what softness even looked like. She reintroduced me to it. Jean had this habit of placing her hand gently on my chest whenever she wanted me to calm down. She never raised her voice, never used her anger like a weapon. She was patient, at least in the beginning. I think a part of her liked the idea of fixing me. She once said I was like a locked room, quiet, mysterious, waiting for the right key. She thought she was the key. The first year was golden. Dinners that turned into midnight walks, road trips without destinations. I started leaving my boots at her place. She started calling it our apartment, even though her name was the only one on the lease. I didn't mind. Back then, I thought the rent I paid was emotional. I thought loyalty was enough. But something changed after the second year. She started, flinching at my silences. Told me she didn't understand why I always looked like I was preparing for war, even while brushing my teeth. She said it like a joke, but her eyes didn't laugh. I tried to explain that people like me don't relax. We calculate, we plan, we survive, but Jean didn't want survival, she wanted poetry. She insisted it was harmless. She lied. One morning, she woke up, made tea, and said her chest had been feeling tight. She said she went to the doctor, said they told her she had a mild arrhythmia. Nothing serious, but stress could make it worse. Then she looked me in the eye, held my hand, and said, "I think we should take a break. Not forever. Just until she felt stronger." I didn't beg. I should have asked questions, should have said something, anything. But I was tired. I had just gotten back from an overseas assignment where a kid no older than 15 tried to stab me for my wristwatch. I was tired of pretending everything in our life wasn't quietly falling apart, so I let her go. 3 days later, she posted a photo in front of the Eiffel Tower, her arm locked with Robert's. They looked radiant, unbothered, alive. I stared at the photo for a long time before deleting it. I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. I just felt nothing. Like something inside me had already died the moment she started planning an exit. Karen found me a week later, sitting on the floor of my apartment, eating cereal straight from the box, surrounded by unpacked gear and unread letters. She'd been friends with Jean before they grew apart. Said she stopped talking to her the moment she realized what the heart condition really was. "She used your compassion as a cover story," Karen said. "She didn't leave because of a diagnosis. She left because Robert was waiting." Didn't want to believe it, but Karen wasn't the type to soften words. She stayed anyway. For days. Cooked in silence, fixed my medicine cabinet, even replaced the dead bulbs in the bathroom I had stopped using. It wasn't love. It wasn't pity either. It was something in between. Respect, maybe. Or maybe she just knew how it felt to watch someone you love become a stranger. By the time I walked into that collapsing building a month later, I wasn't hoping to die. I just didn't care if I did. They said when they pulled me out, my heart had almost stopped. Funny, I thought. Jean said the same thing about hers, right before she ripped mine out. The flowers in my hospital room weren't from Jean. They were from the contractor whose son I'd pulled out of the rubble. A neat little card was tucked between the petals. To the man who didn't hesitate, "Thank you for giving me back my boy." Jean hadn't even brought water, just herself. Dressed in a soft beige coat, her hair pulled back, no makeup, no jewelry, like she'd stripped herself down to sincerity. But sincerity doesn't erase history. It doesn't erase Paris, or Robert, or the lie she wore like perfume while she said goodbye. She stood at the edge of my bed like a child sent to confess something she still hadn't decided to be sorry for. Her eyes were rimmed with red, like she'd cried too much to cry anymore. I didn't say anything. The oxygen tube under my nose reminded me I didn't owe her words. "I didn't come for anything," she said after a long pause. I heard what happened and I panicked." I turned my head toward the window. Rain tapped against the glass like it was in a hurry to remind me what day it was. She took a step forward. "Victor, please." Her voice dropped. "At least look at me." I did. Slowly, carefully, like facing a wild animal you once trusted. "Was it worth it?" I asked. She blinked. "What?" "Robert. Paris." Walking away like it never mattered. Jean's mouth parted, but she didn't speak. Right away, she looked ashamed, or maybe just caught. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "But you did." "I thought you stopped loving me," she said, eyes brimming. "You became so distant, so cold. I thought you were just waiting for an excuse to let go." I stared at her like she was a stranger who just happened to share Jean's face. You thought I stopped loving you, so you decided to get a head start on moving on. Her hands shook as she wiped her face. No. Robert was just there, and I was lonely and scared. And when I told you I had a heart condition, you just accepted it. You didn't even ask for details. I didn't ask, I said slowly, because I trusted you. Jean pressed her lips together, and for a moment I thought she might leave. But then she surprised me. She sat down beside the bed, folded her hands, and said the one thing I hadn't expected. I regret it. Silence hung between us like fog. I never stopped thinking about you, Victor, even when I was with him, especially when I was with him. It wasn't the same. It never felt like home. I didn't move. He left 2 weeks ago, she added. Said I wasn't what he expected. The bitterness in my mouth returned. I could almost taste the stale wine from her Paris trip. I'm not here to ask for another chance, she said quietly. I know I don't deserve one. I needed you to know that I never forgot what we had. Karen entered the room, at that moment, holding a paper bag of home-cooked food and a book tucked under one arm. Her eyes met Jean's, and something unsaid passed between them. Jean stood up quickly. I should go. Karen didn't say anything. She set the bag down and waited. Jean turned to me one last time. I'm glad you're alive, Victor. Then she left. No more explanations. No apologies strong enough to change anything. Just distance. Again. Karen didn't ask what we talked about. She just unpacked the food, adjusted the tray table, and said, You look like hell. I feel like it, I muttered. Good, she said. Means you're healing. She paused before adding, Was she crying? Yeah. Karen nodded, then handed me a spoon. Let her. I ate quietly for a while before asking, Do you think people like that really change? Karen didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was steady. Only when it's too late. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The meds helped with the pain, but not with the thoughts. I kept seeing Jean in that beige coat, looking smaller than I remembered. She wasn't the girl from Paris anymore. She was something else, something half-broken. But I didn't feel pity. I felt tired. Tired of wondering what part of me had ever thought love was about proving loyalty to someone who saw it as optional. Jean had left. And now she wanted me to remember her pain, but she had never once stayed to understand mine. Victor stared at the ceiling of his hospital room, but all he could see was the reflection of her face, the way Jean looked when she said, I regret it. The words weren't loud, but they struck him like a slow-moving car you didn't dodge because you thought it would stop. He'd been taught to handle pain. He could reset his own dislocated shoulder, patch a bullet graze with whatever fabric, was nearby and press on with fractured ribs. But emotional pain, that had no procedure, no rules, no morphine. His hands trembled faintly under the blanket. No one would notice unless they looked closely. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, something between grief and rage. Jean's voice had cracked, but her eyes had searched him like she still expected something to be there. A flicker of love, a sign she still mattered. But Victor had nothing left to give her. That was what scared him. He wanted to feel fury, to rise out of the bed and shout, You don't get to cry over me now. But the truth was colder than anger. He just didn't care anymore, and that indifference hurt more than the heartbreak ever had. Karen had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, her head tilted to the side, arms crossed like she was guarding him from ghosts. Victor turned his head slowly toward her and studied her face. She had been there when no one else was, not with speeches or declarations, but with presence. She showed up, stayed, cooked without asking, listened without needing a story, and now she slept like someone who trusted the silence. He closed his eyes, but the noise inside his head didn't stop. He kept hearing Jean's voice saying, I thought you stopped loving me. He wanted to ask, would it have made a difference if I had told you I didn't? Would you have stayed? But deep down, he knew the answer. Jean hadn't left because she didn't feel loved. She left because she thought she could get more love somewhere else. A knock sounded at the door the next morning. A nurse entered with paperwork and a gentle smile. Your release is scheduled for tomorrow, Mr. Hale. Doctor says you're recovering faster than expected. He nodded. Thanks. After she left, Karen stirred. She rubbed her eyes, looked around, and sat up straight. You sleep at all? Victor shook his head. Karen studied him. You thinking about her? He didn't answer. She took that as confirmation. You don't have to explain it to me, she said softly. But don't lie to yourself. Victor looked down at his bandaged hands. What do you mean? She still has a grip on you, Karen said. Maybe not as strong, maybe not enough to break you, but enough to make you hesitate. That hit something raw, because it was true. He didn't want Jean back. He didn't miss what they had, but part of him was still tangled in the why. Why did she lie? Why didn't she say goodbye properly? Why now? Why come back just to say sorry and vanish again? Suspense built in his chest, not from not knowing, but from knowing he'd never get the real answer. That's what uncertainty was. Not the fear of what you didn't know. The fear that you already did. The next afternoon, as he sat in the lobby signing discharge papers, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. Victor, I just needed to say this once more. I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to be loved by someone like you. He stared at the message. Not because he believed her, but because part of him once would have. Karen leaned over his shoulder. She didn't say anything, just read the words, and then looked at him. What are you going to do? She asked. Victor thought about it. About the child he saved. The rubble. The moment he stopped breathing. The silence afterward. He stood, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and said without looking at her, nothing. Karen smiled faintly and followed him out. Suspense didn't always come from a looming enemy. Sometimes it came from the person you used to love, from the thought that maybe, if they cried hard enough, you'd break again. Victor had almost broken, once. But not this time. He walked out of the hospital into the sunlight, still aching, still healing, but no longer waiting for an apology that couldn't rewrite the past. Victor never planned to see Jean again. Not intentionally, not face to face. Whatever words they had exchanged in the hospital room felt like final chapters, closed, signed, and buried beneath a weight of silence. But life, as always, ignored intentions. 2 weeks after his discharge, Victor received an invitation. It wasn't mailed, it wasn't formal. It came through Karen, who showed up at his apartment door holding an envelope with gold embossing and an expression that made him hesitate before opening it. It's a gala, she said, eyes steady. Fundraiser for a hospital expansion. Jean's on the planning committee. Victor stared at the envelope, unmoving. She asked if I could bring you along, Karen added, her voice brittle at the edges. The words weren't casual. There was weight behind them. Not jealousy, Karen wasn't like that. But there was caution and something else. A quiet, tired sadness. Victor didn't say yes. He just put the envelope down on the kitchen counter and walked away. But that night, he couldn't sleep. His thoughts spun in circles. What if she said something? What if she apologized again? What if she didn't? The night of the gala arrived, and with it, his decision. He went. Not for Jean, not even for closure, but because a part of him wanted to stand in front of her and feel nothing, to prove to himself that whatever threads had once bound them had long since snapped. The event was held in a glass-walled ballroom overlooking the city skyline. Everything shimmered. Light, people, music. Waiters passed by with glasses of wine. The clink of cutlery danced between conversations, and no one noticed when Victor walked in wearing a plain black suit and eyes that didn't shine. Karen stayed. By his side, her presence like armor, calm, unspoken protection. People greeted her. She smiled politely. But Victor wasn't listening. He had already seen Jean. She stood across the room near a table of donors, dressed in a satin emerald gown, her hair swept over one shoulder, laughter curving her lips as she spoke to a man Victor didn't recognize. She looked radiant, like heartbreak had never touched her, like regret was just a word, not a memory. But then her eyes met his, and the room tilted. It lasted only a second, but in that second, her laughter disappeared. The wineglass trembled in her hand. Her lips parted slightly, as if the name she refused to say had suddenly landed in her throat. Victor looked away first, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. He spent the next half hour dodging eye contact and small talk until, eventually, the confrontation became inevitable. She found him alone near the back of the room, standing beside a window, watching headlights blur beneath the city fog. Victor. He didn't turn around. Jean? You came. I did. Silence fell. It was awkward in the way that only former lovers understand, the kind of silence that was once filled with kisses and late-night stories. Do you have a minute? She asked. He finally looked at her. You've had years? Jean flinched at that. It was subtle, but there. I never thought you'd come, but I hoped. Why? Because I needed you to hear me out, she said. The last time we talked, I didn't say everything I needed to. Victor nodded. Once? Then say it. Jean glanced around, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. I lied to you. About the heart condition. About Robert. About all of it. I know. I thought I was doing you a favor, she said. Back then you were so closed off. I didn't know how to reach you anymore. I was scared. Scared you'd never open up. Scared that I was pouring myself into something that would never hold me back. Victor exhaled slowly, like a man tired of hearing explanations that came too late. So you ran. I did, she whispered. And I hated myself for it. No, he said, eyes hard. You hated being caught. There's a difference. Her eyes welled with tears, but he wasn't moved. I kept waiting for the moment you'd come back and own it. Not soften it. Not explain it. Just admit what you did without trying to make it look noble. Jean's shoulders sagged. Her voice cracked. I was selfish. Yes, I was a coward. Yes, and I still love you. The air between them froze. Victor didn't blink. No, you don't. Jean stared at him, wounded. How can you say that? Because love doesn't abandon, he said simply. Love doesn't lie, doesn't manipulate, and it sure as hell doesn't come crawling back just because the new guy walked away. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, but he didn't reach for her. I thought you died, she said through shaking breaths. When I heard what happened at the site, I couldn't breathe. I thought I'd never get the chance to make things, right? You still won't, he said, because it's not your chance anymore. It's mine, and I'm choosing not to waste it on someone who only realized I mattered when I almost didn't exist. The confrontation was quiet, but devastating. John sobbed softly, shoulders trembling. I deserve that. No, Victor said. You deserve peace, just not mine. He stepped around her and began walking away, but then he paused. You know what the worst part is? He said, still facing the exit. She looked up. I loved you more than I loved myself, and you made me hate that part of me. And with that, he walked away. He didn't turn back, didn't look over his shoulder. He left the room, the memory, and the weight of her behind him. Outside, Karen was waiting in the car. She looked up when he opened the door and saw the stiffness in his shoulders. Did it help? She asked. Victor closed the door and leaned back in the seat. It didn't fix anything, but it finished something. Karen started the car, and as the lights of the city stretched behind them, Victor allowed himself the first real breath he'd taken in months. The realization was quiet, simple, final. He was free. It had been 7 months since the gala, since Jean's final tears, since Victor walked out without flinching, without looking back. Time had done its work, slow, precise, unforgiving. But Victor hadn't wasted it. The company he co-founded with Karen was thriving. Private security wasn't just lucrative, it was powerful. And power, Victor learned, was the best kind of silence. Jean hadn't contacted him again. She knew better now. But even if she had, she would have only found locked doors and unread messages. Whatever thread still remained between them had been severed that night under the chandelier, in front of crystal glasses and 1,000 strangers. Victor had moved on. Not into another relationship. He wasn't built for that yet, but into something far more satisfying: control, purpose. The mall project he started before the accident had broken ground and was nearing completion. His name was on every permit. Every floor tile and elevator system passed through his approval. Investors called him untouchable. His old psychologist, now a regular friend, joked that Victor didn't need therapy anymore, just spreadsheets. But fate still had one. Final card to play. It came through an anonymous tip sent to the company inbox. A leak. Attached were images and documents showing that Jean had recently started consulting for a competing firm bidding against one of Victor's latest real estate projects. Her job? Undermining his valuation, submitting counterfeit reports to stall his building permits, and attempting to sway city board officials. Victor read the file with an unreadable expression. Karen stood behind him, arms crossed, face tight. She really doesn't learn, does she? Victor remained quiet. He scrolled through photos. Jean leaving government buildings. Jean dining with an official who'd recently put a freeze on Victor's construction request. Karen's voice sharpened. She's not just being petty, she's trying to ruin you. Victor closed the laptop gently, stood up, and walked to the window. He didn't say anything, not at first. Then he turned around and said 5 words. Get me the city auditor. It didn't take long. A few calls, a few signatures, 1. Strategically leaked video showing the same city board official accepting a suspicious consulting payment from a third-party account registered in Jean's name. The next morning, Victor's halted project was reinstated. 2 other firms were suspended pending an ethics investigation, and Jean lost her contract. But Victor wasn't done. He arranged a press release, subtle, clean, stating that his company would now be donating a full scholarship fund in partnership with a rival firm, the same fund Jean had tried to sabotage 5 months prior by claiming the beneficiaries were unqualified. Her name wasn't mentioned, but everyone in their circle knew. The media never called it revenge. They called it reputation restoration. Jean, on the other hand, finally broke. Karen told him 2 days later she'd run into Jean at a small cafe on the edge of the business district. Alone, pale, trying to get her credit card to work. Her cheeks hollow. Her coat, cheap synthetic fabric, the kind that didn't sit right on the shoulders. She looked like she was still waiting for someone to save her, Karen said, setting down her coffee. But no one was coming. Victor nodded, not smiling. Let her wait. He didn't hate Jean anymore. He didn't think about her when he woke up or when he lay down at night. He had burned the pages she once wrote in his life and built towers from their ashes. But he knew people like her never forget being left behind. They never forget being powerless. She hadn't expected him to survive, let alone rebuild, let alone stand taller. But he had, and she knew it, and that was the final punishment. Weeks later, on the eve of his company's expansion into another country, Victor found himself alone in his office. The city lights glowed outside, casting amber streaks across his desk. He sipped from a glass of quiet bourbon and scrolled through messages. One caught his eye. A short email. No attachments. No name. I never should have let go of you. Now I can't even look in the mirror without seeing what I destroyed." Victor stared at the message. He didn't need to check who it was from. The pain behind those words was familiar. He closed the email and hit delete. Then he turned to his window, lifted his glass slightly toward the skyline, and whispered to himself, "You should have thought of that before Paris." That night, Karen joined him on the rooftop terrace. She didn't say much, just stood beside him, hair tied back, wearing that same calm expression she always did when she was silently offering her presents. Victor handed her a second glass. "Already poured. To endings," he said. She clinked her glass softly against his. "And to people who don't get second chances." They both drank. The wind swept past them gently. No words, no ghosts. Jean was gone. Her voice reduced to whispers in inboxes that would never be opened again. Victor didn't need revenge to make himself whole, but giving her nothing at all. That was the sweetest revenge of all.